Alright, hello everyone, welcome back to another brand new videos of Kubernetes. So in this video, we'll be talking about port forwarding. In my previous videos, I talked about how to create mongo cluster, understanding service types, particularly we focused on cluster IP, node port, and load balancer. So without a further ado, let's get started. So what happens if I actually try to talk to Mongo. So let's say I have got Mongo SH. You need to install this if you do not have it installed. So this time, if you see the service is actually listening on port 7000 on my local computer. So this time I'm going to talk to Mongo. And straight you can see I can access the service. Without going into the Kubernetes cluster, I'm actually able to access MongoDB. You can see MongoDB, which is running within my Kubernetes cluster because I have the port forwarded, right? So now, as long as this is open, you can talk to. So this is a temporary connection opening, as you can see. So if I close this and I try to do something now here, you can see, so if I say show DBs, this is not gonna work. You see? The connection is interrupted because it doesn't know how to talk to. It means that my computer doesn't know how to talk to your Kubernetes cluster. So now if I am actually running this one more time, and this time actually I say show DBs, you can see it it shows the list of DBs that is available. These are basically the by default. I have a minikube cluster running already with two nodes, this one being the master node, this one is the worker node. Alright, two nodes. And I do not have anything running at this point. There is no pod, there is no service. I'm gonna show you this one, what it does, and I'm gonna talk about the service. I talked about this stuff in my previous videos. If you have seen my previous video of K3D, here I basically explain pretty detailed about service types and things like that. But anyway, today I'm gonna go through them one more time so that you understand the concept pretty well. I have a deployment.yaml file and service.yaml file. So in the deployment.yaml file, disclaimer, I have actually taken this manifest file from this particular location. The only modification I did is basically this part. Anything else is not my work. What it does is basically deploy MongoDB 4.2 version, and this is the port where this service actually is exposed. And I have a service. This is a cluster IP type. As you can see, this is something I modified. You don't really need this line particularly, but it's still. And this is where the service is basically the service is listening to. You can clone the repo and play with that if you're interested. So without a further ado, let's get started. So kubectl apply -f, and I have this MongoDB. Where is this project actually? So let me see. This is in Kubernetes. Yeah, and then Mongo. And right here I have deployment.yaml. So I'm gonna deploy this. So if I deploy, it's going to create one replica, meaning that one copy of our pod, right? So one pod will be running at all times. Then the second thing I'm going to do is basically this one. So kubectl apply -f, and this is Kubernetes, Mongo, and then service.yaml. So here, what we have done deployment. We did one deployment, right? And then we did create a service. Let me see, I need to get SVC. Okay, I have it. So here you can see the service is actually called Mongo, and this is the cluster IP, and this is the target port as we mentioned right here, if you remember, right? So this is where the service is actually exposed. So what we are gonna do, we're gonna say kubectl get pods, and we can see there is a Mongo pod running. What I'm gonna do right now is basically show you this kubectl get pod, and it's Mongo, and I'm going to basically print out the port number where this service is basically listening to. So this is the command I'm going to be running, and this gives me the port number, right? This is where The service is actually running. So right now we know that our service is running and we're gonna do port forwarding. Why do you actually need port forwarding? What does it actually do? Port forwarding does basically create a tunnel from my computer to all the way to my Kubernetes cluster. So I'm talking about the Minikube cluster. So what it does is basically the following. So let's say if I'm saying kubectl port forward, this is the command we are gonna run. Port forward will let you talk from outside of this Kubernetes cluster to a specific pod. So we are talking about this particular Mongo pod where service is actually running. This is why actually I run this command on this particular port. So from our computer, we cannot access this port, right? Because it is not exposed outside of the Kubernetes cluster. So this is what we're gonna do. So we are going to talk or interact from our computer to this Kubernetes pod, which is listening on this particular port. So what I'm gonna do, there are multiple ways actually you can do. Oh, by the way, I need to run this kubectl get rs, basically replica set. You can see one replica is running because we mentioned right here at all times run one replica. So it's actually running. So desired is one, meaning that we are asking for one, and current is one, ready is one. So meaning that we were asking for one pod to run at all times, and it is actually doing that. So everything looks good. So now we can go back, kubectl port forward, and right here, what we're gonna do, we're gonna say service. This is what actually I showed in my previous videos. I did not talk about pod deployment replica set. So we're gonna talk about this. So if you are trying to actually do a port forward, you are trying to do a 1-1 mapping. 1-1 mapping means this basically. Let's say from my local host, let's say 7,000. From this port, I will be trying to talk to this particular port, which is actually the pod. Basically, every pod has an IP address in Kubernetes, right? By default, is gonna be 10 dot something, right? So whatever IP address of this pod, you can actually see it right here. So here, right here, you can see the Mongo is basically exposed. This is the endpoint, right? So 10 dot something. So let's say this is the one. So what it is trying to do, the port forwarding I'm trying to explain, from my local computer has an IP address 192.168, right? That's a private IP address. And this is a different IP address. It's actually trying to communicate from my local computer to the Kubernetes cluster. And this is a pod, right? Actually, it's trying to talk to this particular specified pod, which is actually running MongoDB and listening on this port, right? So this is what port forward does. It creates a tunnel and forwards all of your traffic that comes to this particular address to your Kubernetes cluster. Is basically communication is two-way, so to and from. So let's say I'm sending a request, a HTTP request, so it's gonna send you back the response to this client, right? So this is what exactly it does. So we're gonna see that in practice. So kubectl and port forward, and let's say we talk about the service, and service is basically listening on, if you have remembered, the service is basically listening on this particular port, right? So you're going to copy this. This is what you can also see it running as vc command, right? And let me show it to you. So what I'm going to do right now, if I'm saying this, it means that I'm telling, hey, I do not want to specify a particular port. Let's say here I talked about this port. Now I'm telling that, hey, I do not have a choice of port, so give me a random port. So right now, it's gonna give me a random port. Let me see how this works. So actually, look at this. It's actually giving me a random port. So if I'm trying to access this service, let me go here. Look at this. So now let me make it a little bigger. So now actually I got a response back. and you can see the handling connection for this one, right? And if I access this service on this port, on this particular port, is actually talking behind the hood to my Kubernetes pod, which is actually exposed right here, right? So from my local computer is actually talking to Kubernetes cluster, right? So why actually do you need this? Maybe let's say you have use cases where you do not want to expose your Kubernetes cluster for outsider. For debugging purposes, for testing purposes, you could do port forward. And this is how you could actually expose your service and you can test out things, right? You can experiment things. So you can see this is the response I get back in return. So what happens, let's say I cancel this, right? And this time, instead of this, let me talk about port 7000. This time, if I'm trying to do this, it says that unable to listen on port. Actually, this address is already is in use. I might have something else actually running on that port, so which is why it's not. So you need to basically make sure that you close the connection. All right. So actually, it is here, I believe. Yeah, I think it's here. Most likely. Yeah, you can see this is where my connection were open. That's why it was not working. So let me go back because I have now this time it's working because I did not remember that I had something else actually running on there. So if I'm trying to access this time, you can say I can still access the service, right? What happens if I try to do something else? So this time, let's say I want to say port 5000 and then 27017, and I also want to say 8000 27017. Is this possible? Yes, it's possible. You are doing 1-1 mapping, meaning that this time you have opened up three different ports on your local computer. I'm talking about on my Mac, right? So 7000, 5000, 8000. So 8000 is mapped to the port number where my service is actually listening to. If I run this, it's gonna still work. So if I'm going to now 8000, I try to access the service, still I'm actually able to access the service. So this is what you could actually do. So what happens if I'm trying to do something else? Let's say this time I'm trying to do something else like this. Let's say I just say 27017. I think that's the port number, right? So if you are trying to do this time, what happens? Look at this. Opening up this particular port, let me go there, right? This particular port, and it is actually mapped to the specified port, which is where basically the service is actually exposed, right? So if I cancel this time I want to do something else. Let's say I say 7000. So this time you can see it doesn't have a port, right? It's not listening on that particular port. It is actually listening on this particular port. So therefore, it doesn't know how to actually talk to, right? So you see the difference. But if you're saying something like this is gonna work because now this is the port on your local computer, the left hand side, and the right hand side is basically the port where my service is running on the container side, right? So this is why if you pass this, it doesn't actually work, it works. Now I want to show you something else. Let's say this time I want to say bind address because this is something you can actually do. So in this case, I can say localhost. Remember, if you want to specify particular IP address, you could actually do so. So let's say you have a particular IP address 192.168 blah blah blah, you can actually do so. And every time you pass an IP address, you put a comma. But in our case, if you remember, we pass this one, bind IP of this. So it's basically gonna listen to anything, literally. We don't really need this. So if you want to say this is what you can do because any IP addresses on your network, or you can say specific IP address, let's say 10.10.10. And this specific IP address is basically I'm talking about my private IP address. So this is what is not going to be able to listen because this is what actually doesn't exist on my private IP address. So remember that. So this is what is basically port forward, right? So you can expose your service from outside of the cluster for testing purposes, for any other purposes, like on a particular port on the local computer. So this is what exactly is doing. So let me show you something else. Let's say this time our service is basically listening on this one, right? So what happens if I actually try to talk to Mongo? So let's say I have got Mongosh. You need to install this if you do not have it installed. So this time, if you see the service is actually listening on port 7000 on my local computer, so this time I'm going to talk to Mongo. And straight you can see I can access the service. Without going into the Kubernetes cluster, I'm actually able to access MongoDB. You can see MongoDB which is running within my Kubernetes cluster because I have the port forwarded, right? So now as long as this is open, you can talk to. So this is a temporary connection opening, as you can see. So if I close this and I try to do something now here, you can see, so if I say show DBs, this is not gonna work. You see, the connection is interrupted because it doesn't know how to talk to. It means that my computer doesn't know how to talk to your Kubernetes cluster. So now if I am actually running this one more time, and this time actually I say show DBs, you can see it it shows the list of DBs that is available. These are basically the by default. For example, if you want to do something more, you can just always go to help, actually help. It is going to show you a lot of the options that you could actually do. So you can see show profile, show users, and blah blah. So many things you can do. You can show table, things like that. So anyway, so use admin and show tables. Yeah, show roles maybe I can do, right? We so far talked about port forwarding of the service. Now we're gonna do actually kubectl and port forward. This time we're gonna do the port forwarding for the pod. Okay, so 27017, this is where the service was exposed to. So this time we got the random IP address, right? And on the right hand side, I have this. Do the port forwarding for this particular pod, we can actually access this service, right? So you're gonna kill and gonna try the other one. So this time, port forwarding we're gonna do for kubectl port forward, and we're gonna do for replica sets. So replica sets by default you can see is Mongo is coming. So this time we're gonna do again. We're gonna put the random port instead of specifying it. If I'm trying to do this time again, this port number is different, right? Because it's randomly chosen. So again, you can see you can access the service. If I'm killing this and trying the other option, kubectl port forward, this time we're gonna do deployment, and deployment is basically Mongo, right? And we're gonna say 27017, and still we're gonna be able to access the service. So let's see if I'm going here, trying this still. So we did port forwarding for deployments, we did port forwarding for replica sets, we did port forwarding for the pod, and throughout the whole video, we talked about port forwarding, deployments. Instead of deployments, we're gonna say service is Mongo, and this time we're gonna say the port number. So still, this is actually working, as you can see. So we did put forward for the services, for the deployments, for the replica sets, for the ports, like 1, 2, 3, 4 different types we tried, and we are still able to access the service. So I hope you understand the concept of port forwarding. This is how actually you can access your service without actually going into Kubernetes cluster using a port forward. So this is what was the purpose of today's video. I hope you understand the concept of port forward and you know basically how to access your service from your local computer without exposing your Kubernetes cluster publicly. That's it for today. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and talk to you soon. And hey, if you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye bye.